So, let's get started here, chatting a bit about Eventide. I think I'm going to keep this relatively short. On Tuesdays, I like to kind of do a bigger dive into concept, and this coming Tuesday will be no exception. But today, we're just going to kind of do a bit of an update. The past week has been, well, incredibly fruitful. I went from having no finished words on Eventide to today cracking 16,000. By the end of this long weekend, I expect to be well over 20. 2 a.m. in Egypt. That is awesome. Yeah, in the past week, I've put down about 17,000 words on this new setting. And I am looking forward to expanding it even further. Yeah, as it turns out, being part of NaNoWriMo has really lit a fire under me to get words on paper. It's forced me to solidify ideas that have only been kind of half-formed thoughts up to this point. So yeah, my if I check my status right now, let's see here, NaNoWriMo. Where's my page at? Yeah, I just broke 16,000 words today, which is great. As a motivator, it's been really good to get me to actually sit down and do design work every day. I get up early, I do some writing, I go to work, I do all the things that have to be done at work, I come home, I do some more writing. So it's been good. And up to this point, I have two primary documents. Now, those of you who are part of the Patreon know this already. The project is being split into two separate pieces. One is what I'm calling the Gazetteer. The Gazetteer talks about the world, gives you a bunch of information on the setting, and focuses in very specifically on the starting town called Wormbone, which is in the northern reaches of Atlantis. Atlantis? I gotta double check the wording on that. In the setting. Cuyahoga, thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. So that's the Gazetteer. It kind of gives a basics of the world, and focuses on one town in high detail, one region in good detail, one continent in very light detail, and the world in just scant descriptions. For those of you who are wondering, 16,000 words, if we were to change that into pages of nothing but solid text, no art, no graphic treatment at all, 16,000 words would be almost 20 pages of text, roughly. Just about, depending on the fonts and the headers used. You get about 800, 900 words a page, depending on the layout. Getting 20 pages of content written doesn't seem like a lot, but considering how much of it is kind of expansive stuff, and once you start adding art into it, you're probably looking at more like, I've probably written almost an entire 32-page supplement at this point. So, that's pretty good, and my goal for the month is 50,000 words. Now, 50,000 words is not going to cover everything I have in mind. In fact, I'd probably have to get closer to 80 or 85,000 words to do what I need to do. So, long road ahead. But, so one document is the Gazetteer. The other document is what I'm currently just calling the Rules Folio. And it contains all of the mechanics, all of the rules, all of the pieces to add to Pathfinder 2nd edition to make it play the right way for Eventide. One of the great things about this project is now that 2nd edition is done, I can build the campaign setting around the rules that exist. I don't have to adapt. I can actually just create it to be a tailored fit, to work with the pieces that are there and to play with them in new and kind of interesting ways. So, that's what I'm doing. And right now the split is about 50-50. I've put in about a little less than half the words on the Gazetteer. A little bit more than half the words have gone into the rules document. So I started by just having giant outlines. They're, 1,000-word outlines, 1,500 word outlines. Those don't count into my word total. Those are just outlines telling me what I need to write, giving me an idea of the pieces I still need to put together. And I started out working on ancestries because they were one of the first things that was in the outline, and I just kind of picked a place and started working. So the ancestries have come a long way. I would say that the information on ancestries for Eventide is 70 or 80% done, including a complete first draft of the Gloamling, the new ancestry I talked about a lot on Tuesday. If you missed that, that entire discussion, including a broader picture of the ancestries as a whole, is now up on my YouTube channel. So I suggest you check it out. If you are already a supporter of my Patreon, and you're at the Eventide Lord level or higher, I think it's $25 or higher, those are the folks that get the first view of the rules and mechanics as they kind of come out of me, and as I'm ready to kind of show them off. And they're also the ones that I'm asking directly for feedback and thoughts. So the way that works is you're a member on the Patreon. That gives you access to a special channel on the Discord. That's where I posted up some of the information. So for those at that level, make sure you log into the Discord sometime soon. Some of that first look at the Gloamling is already there. So if you're curious as to what direction the Gloamling is taking, where it's going to go, that's where you can find it. But that's for the folks at the $25 level and higher. Everybody else, you'll get it as soon as it's kind of through all of its initial paces and process. That's going to be a little bit, because I've finished writing the whole document. You'll get the whole thing at once. But yeah, that's kind of where a lot of that material is at. That's kind of where a lot of the building has been going. I think on the Gazetteer side, I've been working a lot on figuring out some bigger picture stuff. I spent a good deal of time writing the history of the world, and then I really started diving into the continent and some of the regional notes. Wormbone has a lengthy kind of history start, but I haven't gotten too deep into it because I need to spend some time doing a map. I will probably do that map. I'll probably do that map by the end of the weekend. I need to do a continental map as well. Yeah, Anhart, that my current thought is that I'm probably going to be writing through December to get to where I need to be, which would put some of the delivery a little later. Now, what I may do is focus on one half over the other. That way, I can actually show progress. So what I could do is I could either finish them both simultaneously, or I could work on one and then the other. It's probably smartest for me to work on one and then the other, but I kind of need them both to develop at least somewhat at the same time, because I'm building rules for the world, and while I'm doing that, I might as well get that world lore and world information down. Otherwise, I kind of get lost really easy, and you don't want that. So, yeah, there's that. Now, the other thing I've been working on, because I'm getting close to the end of the Ancestries part, I need to write a few more feats for the various Ancestries and stuff, but a lot of the kind of basic information is down. I then bounced around and started looking at the other major components that I need to build. Obviously, a big chunk of the rules folio is class options. Every single class is going to get new options and new things to play with in the Eventide setting, mostly tailored to the story and narrative of the world. So, you can expect that the rules folio will have, new and interesting, alchemy, new types of rage feats and things like that. I haven't really kind of sat down and charted out every little detail, but for most of the classes at this point in time, I have sketch outlines of what needs to go in there, but it needs more thought and more time. What I have decided, though, is that the setting really needs a new class. I've been playing around with this for a while. I think the one thing that it doesn't currently have in a way that's going to work for me. Grossly Incandescent would like to know about the new Oracle feats. The Oracle isn't out yet. I can't write feats for a class that's not out yet. It's just entered playtest, so I can't. I don't want to write things for a class that isn't finished. And to be honest, I won't want to put out anything for the Oracle until after it's published, just to keep things above board. I mean, it seems obvious, but it's worth stating that although I do have a deep and thorough understanding of what Paizo is up to, I'm not using that information to build this. I'm specifically kind of avoiding it. So if it's not out, I just don't touch it. So instead, I have decided that I'm going to build a new class for the game. One that speaks kind of more to the setting and is something that is uniquely at home in the world of Eventide. So it's very early days yet, and I don't want to go too much into detail on it, but I am building a class called the Penumbrist. The Penumbrist is a spellcaster, a full spellcaster, occult spellcaster that can draw upon the world of shadow and the secrets that it hides to create weapons, create creatures, and generally manipulate the environment and the minds of those around him. The Penumbrist is a class that's very suited to the world of Eventide because the rising occult magic. As the other magics have kind of faded away, occult magic has remained steady, and this discipline has grown over the years. Starting out as just a minor sub-study, it soon became its own entire branch of magical theory, and it has now grown into a larger kind of sect. There are penumbrists in a lot of places. In particular, the Empire uses them. The Imperium uses them quite a bit. Let's see. Is this a product I am kickstarting? No. Well, probably not. I don't want to say absolutely not, because I'm not quite sure yet. Now, I'll explain that in just a second. What was that bit? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, the Zankar Imperium uses Penumbrist quite a bit. If you're curious what the spelling is, it's PN. There you go. Yep. I don't believe it's too similar to the Technomancer. I'd have to take a closer look, but I don't believe so. There may be some elements of it that are kind of similar, but yeah. So it's an interesting little class. It doesn't have like a spell book or anything like that. It has to prepare its spells. Members of the Penumbra's class have to prepare their spells in dim light, and from there they commune with the shadow, and it whispers spells into their mind. So that's good. And then, of course, the voice that is whispering to you comes in, is called your calling, and your calling has a kind of attitude to it, and based on that attitude, you get different umbral spells, which are the focus spells of the Penumbrist. So that's kind of where it's heading right now. That's what I'm building. I'll talk a lot more about it when I have more of it. Right now I'm still in the middle of building feats and things like that and trying to decide exactly what the spells are and what the spells do. But it's coming along rather nicely, and it's a fun little class. So I'm hoping that as soon as I can share it with all of you, or particularly with people of the right level on my Patreon, and then eventually with all of you through the final release. So, someone asked me before whether or not this was going to be a Kickstarter. It's an interesting question that I don't really have a great answer to right now. Right now, it's being supported via Patreon. If you're interested, the way to support this project, is the following link. What I'm doing right now is getting the words on paper. The Patreon gets you an early look at that material. It'll go through a basic development and editing pass from me, but then the folks who back it on Patreon will get an early look at it. From that point forward, the path depends a lot on all of you. I'm going to be working with my artist, Lance Red, who I'm in talks with to do more art for the project. He did some of the early art for the adventure that this initially kind of spawned out of, and I'm working with him to get more pieces. So as I get more art, the next thing I'm going to want to do is hire an editor and someone to do layout for me. That's expensive work, but it's worth doing. I have some skill, but I don't do that professionally. My job is to invent interesting and fun game stuff. So that is always a challenge. Now, ultimately, this will come down to a point where I have one of two options. Either I generate enough funds and I just create it as a PDF and offer it as a PDF through places like DriveThru and things like that. That is certainly a way that I can get it out there. If I want to do print copies, though, I probably have to turn to Patreon. Not Patreon, to Kickstarter. And what I probably need there is enough funding to buy a lot more art, a lot more graphic design, probably more editing passes, and then of course there's the printing, shipping, and distribution costs. So it gets pretty pricey pretty quick, but it might be worth it. Depends on what all of you want, to be honest. Darren, I think you have to put the exclamation point first, and I still think the XP command is broken, FYI. That thing has not worked for me for like several months now. Let's see. Selfin, what advice would you give someone new in programming? Talking to the wrong guy. All of the work I do is pen and paper and analog. The games that I design are of that type. Hidden Twig, are they charisma based? No, the Penumbrist is intelligence based. For the time being. It's early. I've actually been toying with charisma based as well. But I don't know yet. I'm honestly not sure. Could go either way. Currently int. We'll see. They're not spontaneous casters, so. So yeah. Playing around with that, the Gloamling text has been well received by some folk. You can get a peek at that right now if you're a supporter of my Patreon. And yeah, there isn't an int-based occult caster right now. There's a charisma-based occult caster, but there is not an int-based occult caster. So I'm kind of leaning that way just to try and make sure that it's a little different. Always trying to find new niches to explore for the rules content that I'm creating. So yeah. Let's see. What else do I have to share? I figured out all the continents. That's good. One thing that I'm still toying around with is the deities. I know that I have very few of them, but I've yet to come up with a schema that I'm perfectly happy with. I do know this, though. In the world, there aren't like separate lists of deities for each ancestry. It's not like dwarves have their own special deities. No, everybody just has different names for the same deities. Yeah. I mean, the Witch isn't out yet, Philantrix, but sure, yes. The playtest is out, so. Hidden Twig, no. Currently, they take the occult spell list. That's it. They don't vary from it. Yeah, you kind of wouldn't want to necessarily have the divine or the arcane list. They're a little harder to use. Interestingly enough, magic. I've finally gotten all of my words written on magic and how the base system works. And basically, at its heart, the system of magic is such that long ago, when shortly after the events of Eventide, which was this storm of darkness that swept over the world. After that, that's when magic started to go out of kilter. And the first people to research it suddenly noticed that there were some areas where spells didn't work quite as well. That when they cast spells, they drained more of their arcane knowledge. They found that they were more exhausted when they cast in these areas because it took more of their energy to get the spell to manifest. Ultimately, they were able to kind of categorize this, and in most places in the world, they could cast spells, and spells would happen as normal. But there were some areas where the magic was thinner, and in those places, whenever one would cast a spell, you would lose an additional slot. So if you cast a 3rd level spell, you would suddenly, I cast Fireball, and you would lose the Fireball, but you would also lose another spell as well. Its energy would just siphon away and drain away, leaving you with less to work with. Now, for those with slots, they would just lose an extra slot, so you would quickly find that you kind of ran out of magic much faster. You were exhausted quicker because the field of magic wasn't working quite as you expected. In some places, it was so bad that you couldn't manifest spells at all. Doing so just wouldn't work. And they soon learned that it was dependent upon the tradition. Like, it wasn't like arcane magic might be okay in one area, but not as good in another, whereas divine might be bad in both. They also quickly learned that there was a way to bolster this, to kind of reinforce one's own connection to the field of magic by carrying around and using links, basically ties to that form of magic. So divine spellcasters might carry around reliquaries that give them a closer tie to their deity, which bolsters them against the fading of the magical field. But the only problem is those aren't reliable either. And it causes all sorts of problems. Over time, this has become so bad, and the areas of magic are so thin that that most arcane schools and whatnot have just gone out of business. They've just closed up shop because magic isn't working anymore, and it makes it really tough. I do actually have an answer for items and consumables, by the way. They work under similar restrictions. Consumables a little less so. All of their magic is kind of already stored inside when they're created. So they're kind of okay because they have it all kind of bundled. But the magic items become a little less reliable. The ones that don't have it stored all entirely within. The ones you have to activate take more time to activate, so it becomes harder to use them. So, in the end, this has affected primal magic the worst. Primal magic throughout the world is almost entirely gone. Arcane and divine magic is bad, and occult magic seems to have weathered this okay. So no one's quite sure why, and in fact, most of the scholars who studied it, this was centuries ago now. So the people today don't really even understand it, and for most modern folk, it's just not part of their everyday experience anymore. They know that magic exists. They've seen people cast spells. Those sorts of things do still happen. But for them, it's just not a concern anymore. They have to plow the field and prepare the crops and, turn over, coin to the tax man. They have bigger problems. But for those who actually investigate this, it's a growing, burgeoning problem. So that's kind of some of the direction that is going. I think one thing of note, this doesn't mean that Eventide is a low magic setting. It's not a high magic setting, that's for sure. But for the player characters, magic is much more accessible than it is for ordinary folk. Obviously, player characters will still, there will still be wizards and clerics and, there will be spellcasters. But for the common folk in the world, magic is a bit more of a rare thing. And for many of them, even if they did have, sorcerous blood, they may never realize it because they're in an area where their particular tradition doesn't work. So, there's that. Alchemists actually are in the envious position of not actually using magic. They're creating alchemical formulas and potions and have become, in some ways, the de facto healers and helpers of the world. So many communities will have an alchemist as their healer. I low fantasy, maybe. I'm riding the line. I think the setting itself is a little lower than what the players will experience, because the players are special, and they may delve into this. They may explore the old places where magic once held much more powerful sway. So for their experience, magic might be a bit more present. But for the ordinary folk, less so. There are still magical places left in the world. There's plenty of regions that people can explore and places to go where magic is still very strong and very powerful. In fact, there are places where magic is even more powerful than the baseline, where you can cast a spell and not even lose the slot. So, so it's that's what I'm trying to build. And the great part is using the rarity scheme, using the traditions, playing with all these unique pieces to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'm kind of able to use that language to build a world. And it's a lot of fun. I'm having a blast. And I really do hope that you all enjoy it too. It's been something that I've been wanting to do for a while, is just kind of build my own setting and share it with other people. I've done this for years and played around with settings and building new places, so I'm just excited to get to share it with all of you. Gus1605, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. What is going on? Are there going to be options for the PCs to restore primal magic? Boy, that's a big question. I don't think it's as simple as that. I think, I think the nature of magic and why it is changing and what is even going on with the world as a whole is one of the great mysteries of the setting. When I'm building a setting, I like to be able to understand, kind of how things work, but also why they work and why things are the way they are. That's a big part of how I like to build things. But that doesn't mean all of that's front and center for the players to know or understand, or even in the early days, for the GMs to know and understand. There's some things that I'm going to keep very close to the vest until later. These initial products are not going to contain everything about the world. I'm not going to reveal the deepest, darkest secrets on day one. In fact, I'm going to be very coy about some of those things. So, what kind of nations, if any, would inhabit this setting? 850 years ago, when all of this first started happening, the world was dominated by two very large nations. A dwarven kingdom, which was a weird kind of hegemony that would pass between dwarven noble houses every few generations, and then a collective elven state. And those two dominated most of this continent. But when things started changing, both of those collapsed almost entirely. The elven birth rate fell through the floor, and they stopped having children and ended up abandoning most of their holdfasts. The dwarves, meanwhile, had this ancestral calling to return to the earth, and kind of in a mass exodus disappeared. There are still some of both wandering the world. There are still elves and dwarves, and for players they are still common options, but for everyone else they are now uncommon. But in their place, humans, goblins, orcs, ogres, halflings have kind of filled up the space. Humans in particular, in kind of a coalition with many of the other shorter-lived, more kind of fecund races, gobbled up a large swath of the continent, forming what's now called the Zankar Imperium. It is a very large nation that is dwarfing everyone else by quite a factor. It's like taking up a full half of the continent. Beyond that, though, everything else is small kingdoms and city-states and things like that. Wither King, thank you for the follow. Hidden Twigs. So the dried up areas are going to be pretty static and are tied to the truths? Kind of. And by dried up, magicless? No, they're not magicless. There is a category that is magicless. Most of the world is not that. But it also depends on tradition. Primal magic is almost entirely gone. So yeah. Yeah, it's right now, I'm kind of just playing around with all of my base concepts and getting everything put together. The world and the lore behind it is cooking nicely. The class and ancestries are coming together well. I'm making great progress. I think by the end of the month, I'm going to be kind of well past the halfway point on both books, which will make it kind of a sprint at that point in time. But we'll see how it plays. For those of you supporting me on Patreon, thank you. I've nearly broken $1,000 in support for each of these two PDFs, which is great because I'm going to pour all of that money into more art, and to make these as beautiful and as well put together as I can. I have other business funds and things that I can throw into this as well. So with some hope, we'll be able to put together some pretty nice looking PDFs. I think these first two PDFs will probably be, they won't have all the art that I want, so they'll probably be more like 40-ish pages each, 40 to 45 pages each, maybe closer to 50. With all the art, they'll probably be closer to 64. That's what I'm targeting, just so that I can have two 64-page books. If I put them together, it's 128. This is all the joys of making books, is that you have to work within page signatures if you want it to be cost economical. Like you create books in increments of 16 pages. That's why it's 32, 48, 64, 128, 256. All that is all in increments of 16 pages because that's the easiest way to print. So, hey there, GM Brent. Hey there, Kaffa. What you miss? Me talking about Eventide. That's it. Talking about the brand new class, the Penumbrist. So you might want to go back and catch up on that. Am I making any adventures for this as well? Smooth Criminal, I think, so this actually started as an adventure, for those of you who missed it. Eventide actually started as a gigantic adventure that came with characters provided. And the entire thought behind it was, you aren't just experiencing this adventure, you are experiencing the story of these characters in this adventure. But as I built more and more of the adventure, I realized I needed more and more of the world. That's why I ended up building the setting first. So will there be adventures? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see what I can do about creating a short adventure to go with these kind of intro pieces. The Gazetteer and the Rules Folio. I definitely want there to be an adventure that kind of also kicks this off. I don't have an outline for it yet. I need to build literally everything else before I can do that. So right now that's on the wish list pile, but I would say that it's probably pretty likely. I think putting together an adventure to get things started, and this will be more of a traditional adventure where you make your own characters. There is this special adventure that I'm writing, which was called The Edge of Eventide, which is kind of a much more interesting thing that I'm trying to build. It's what I like to call a dramatic campaign, because you're not just playing whatever you want, you're playing the characters that this story is actually about. And so you get to experience it all from their perspective and walk in their shoes. But that's for the future. Right now I need to get the world built. And it's coming along well. Yeah. Well, thank you, Smooth Criminal. I've been excited about this project for a few years now, but Pathfinder 2nd Edition started eating up all of my spare time, so it never really got finished. But now that that's done and I've got more free time, this has become my prime focus. So it's what I'm chugging away on, and as of today I just broke 16,000 words, so good progress, you know. Even if this does end up being around 80 to 85,000 words, that means I'm at like the 20% spot, which is not a bad place to be after only a week. Will it be less railroady than the old Dragonlance modules, Kaffa? I hope so. That was forefront in my mind, that the way those Dragonlance modules were written kind of had predetermined outcomes. But that's the trick, is finding out a way to allow them not to be a railroad that doesn't just break the moment the players do something unexpected. How much does map making come into play in world building? Less in the early days, a lot more in the very near future. So this weekend I have a long weekend because we have Monday off. Is going to be my map weekend. So next week expect to see snippets of maps start floating around because I have to draw them. I have to draw them and ink them, and I need two maps initially. I need the map of the continent, and I need the map of Wormbone, the starting town. And I need both those maps relatively soon. I'm kind of running out of steam on the world content side because I don't have the map. I can do some stuff without it, but eventually you start writing stuff that you're like, I have no idea how these things fit together because I don't know what's touching what or what's nearby or anything like that. So I still have to do that. So map making is about to become a very important component of this. So, yeah. Okay. Well, if anybody has any last-minute question, I will take those, but then we are going to swap over and play some Outer Worlds here in just a minute. Kaffa, I've never used, I don't use map-making software. I have a degree in architecture, and I love drawing maps by hand. So, that's how I always start. Yeah. I break out a bunch of nice fancy pens and a couple pencils, turn on some nice music, and just sit down and draw. It's my ultimate relaxation of just kind of, you know, sitting down and carefully, slowly drawing out a map. It's a lot of fun. All right. Well, hey, if I had Mylar, I would probably do it on Mylar, especially if I could get some acid-free stuff. No, these days mostly just on paper. I don't tend to break out the Mylar anymore. It's it takes me back to my old drafting days. Hey there, Darmoon. Welcome. Jim Brent, thanks for stopping by. Glad that we could chat for a bit. Apple knees, I'm not sure that we're talking about the same thing. You may be confusing what became the links to kind of help with the casting of magic. So you're thinking of the shards. The shards are what arcane spellcasters call their links. So they have shards, which are basically broken fragments of old magic items. That's what arcane casters have. Divine casters have reliquaries. Primal casters have roots. And I'm trying to remember what the occult casters have. It's written down here somewhere. It's in one of these documents. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, they all have something. You know, it's funny, Apple Knees, you mentioned gems, and I was like, did I mention the gem wood? I'm not sure that I did. Nearly thought that I had already talked about that, but I guess not. Oh, I guess I have now. Oops. You'll learn all about the gem wood soon enough. It's fine. Some trees, they're weird.